Chapter 21 Part 2. After deducting the fractions, the total was 9,000 stars. On average, each piece of wool was only 1,500 stars, which was indeed very cheap. If these wool materials are placed in the goose wool material area, even if they are only scraps, each will not be less than 300 to 400 star coins. Here, they spend at least half of the star coins. The calcification device is placed in the storefront behind the booth. The storefront is not large. There are 5 calcification machines in total, providing free calcification services. However, there is only one calcification master in the shop. The two entered the store and found that the middle-aged man who was preparing to dissolve the stone was the middle-aged man who was holding a strong light. It seems that this middle-aged man bought it after hesitating for a long time. The half-gambling wool material is clearly marked, and each piece is not less than 1 million star coins. But correspondingly, because of the opening of the skylight, the betting growth rate will be much larger than that of all betting wool. Hearing someone dissolving the stone, people from the surrounding booths hurrahed around. If it weren't for a few middle-aged friends who were blocking it, I'm afraid it would have been crowded. Fortunately, there is a holographic projection screen about 2 meters long on the wall of the store, which clearly presents the image of the calcite. People who cannot squeeze in can also know the situation of calcite through the screen. It's still early, and Jinmao doesn't want to miss this lively event. What's more, the solution is to open the skylight of the semi-bet wool material. The probability of jadeite is much higher than that of the full bet wool material. Maybe it will be festive. Ngu, wait here. I'll call Brother Jing. The solution to the stone has just begun, and Jin Mao hurried out of the store to find Bai Jing. This exciting process requires 3 people to watch it together to feel it. Bai Jing was not as eager as Little Fatty. He first put the 3 pieces of wool that he had picked into the shopping cart, and then followed Jin Mao to the store, looking up at the projection screen. This half-gambling wool material is the size of 2 basketballs placed horizontally. Its surface is slightly reddish, the skin is delicate, the center is dotted with clusters of dark green pine flowers, and a long gray-white python belt is connected to the pine flowers, which is very good. Unfortunately, there was a 20-centimeter long crack on the top of the wool. The crack was very thin and penetrated about half an inch into the wool, which made the wool material much more gambling. A window the size of a baby's fist was opened on the right side of the wool material, which was some distance from the fissures. Through the window, a bright green light could be seen. The water was good, and there were no excess impurities. Seeing the performance of this piece of wool, people who have studied gambling stones understand that this is gambling cracks. There are many ways to bet on stones. Some people bet on sex, some people bet on kind, some people bet on fog, and there is a special bet on crack. Crack tresses are extremely harmful to emeralds. Large cracks are easy to observe, while tresses are elusive because they are small and easy to change, large or small, deep or shallow. Due to the concealment and variability of the locks, it is difficult to grasp, so there is a saying, don't be afraid of big cracks and small locks. However, along with risks are often opportunities. Although the wool with tufts is extremely risky, if the fissures do not penetrate deep into the interior, it is very likely to bet up. A skylight has been opened on one side of this piece of wool, and no obvious cracks can be seen when irradiated with a strong light. There is a certain possibility that the cracks have not penetrated into the interior. If it is a bet, this piece of wool material is a veritable rise. The rest of the people also looked eagerly at the big screen, wondering if the crack had entered, and whether this piece of wool was gambling up or down. Master Xieshur observed for a while, and then said to the middle-aged man, "Boss you, to be on the safe side, I'll start wiping from the window at the top." Boss you restrained his inner tension and nodded. Yes. The calcite master manipulated the grinding wheel to rub the stone along the window the size of a baby's fist. After a while, it penetrated about 2 centimeters into the wool, and the window became a cut surface the size of an adult's palm. The middle-aged man sprinkled some water on the side and took a look at it with a strong light. Seeing that there was still no crack on the cut surface and the green seemed to be brighter, he could not help exhaling. It went up, and the crack didn't seem to go in. Yes, the green color is very uniform, and the planting water has reached the level of waxy seeds. If you look at it like this, it is very likely that ice seeds will grow out of it. Yeah, this piece of wool is so big. I'm afraid the jade inside will not be small. Some speculative wool merchants have also begun to bid. If the crack does not go in, as long as the jade inside is 1/5 the size of wool, even if the water cannot reach the ice seed, it will be a proper search. Boss you, I paid 3 million star coins to buy this piece of wool. The cut surface is still a short distance away from cracking. It's better to pass the risk on to me. I'll pay 3.5 million. Boss you. I'll give you 4 million. As the asking price got higher and higher, the smile on Boss Yu's face also got bigger and bigger. This piece of wool was originally priced at 2 million because of the fissures, but he got it for 1.5 million. In just a few minutes, it has tripled. Hearing the tempting price, Boss Yu was moved for a moment, but after seeing the performance of the incision, he immediately held back. This green has obviously been eaten, and the cracks have not affected the inside of the jade, and it is more than 4 million completely solved. If it can reach ice seeds inside, even if there are only 2 or 3 kilograms of ice seeds, the value is more than 10 million. He declined several wool merchants without hesitation and said to the calcite master, "Go ahead and cut a knife along the second half of the crack. Such a large piece of wool. I have been rubbing the stone and don't know when to rub it. So let's look at the distribution of jadeite first. As long as the cut knife is green, it will basically rise." Boss Yu was so excited that he even breathed heavily. This was more than 10 million star coins, which was more than worth the income of his mecha parts factory for a few years. When Master Xiesher was going to operate the automatic stone cutting machine to prepare the stone, Boss Yu couldn't help reminding, "Master, you have to be careful not to hurt the jade inside." Master Xiesher wiped the sweat on his forehead and replied in a low voice. Once again, he carefully observed the direction of the cracks and loose flowers on the wool and cut a knife near the bottom quarter. When the knife goes down, what is exposed on the cut surface is a white stone. Boss Yu frowned, but he also understood that it was impossible for the wool to be all jade, as long as it wasn't cracked. He put the scrapped piece of cut stone aside and let the calcite master continue to cut the cracked piece. Master Xiesher moved the line 2 or 3 centimeters inward and dropped the knife steadily. Bai Jing looked up at the big screen and saw that the cut surface was full of broken jade, and the crack went in, and the cracks are as dense as cobwebs, in a destructive radial shape, extending all the way to the inside. Looking at the distribution and direction of the cracks, at least half of the jade meat has no hope. Boss Yu was in a trance for a moment, but he quickly recovered and comforted himself. It doesn't matter, as long as the crack doesn't eat all the jade meat, it is still possible to bet up, just from a big increase to a small increase. When Master Xiesher cut the second knife, the atmosphere at the scene suddenly became tense, and everyone held their breaths and focused on the master's actions. Whether to bet up or down, success or failure is here. According to the instructions of Boss Yu, Master Xiesher cut a knife directly in the middle of the wool. When the cut surface was exposed, everyone sighed in their hearts. I saw that the jade flesh inside was broken into pieces by the tiny scorpion. Not only did the crack not disappear, but it was more serious than people expected. Seeing this scene, Boss Yu seemed to have been slammed into the head with a hammer, and he felt dizzy for a moment. If it wasn't for the friend next to him, he would have almost collapsed to the ground. Fortunately, Boss Yu himself has experienced strong winds and waves, and he recovered after a while, but his face was ashen, and his voice was unspeakably hoarse. "Master, let's cut another knife." This is his last hope, not asking for a rise in gambling, but not asking too much. The face of Master Xiesher is also not good. After all, a few minutes ago, he thought that he had solved a big piece of wool by himself, but he didn't expect it to collapse in a blink of an eye. He took a deep breath, and without thinking about it, he directly divided the piece of wool that was wiped out of the window in two. The moment he saw the cut surface, Boss Yu closed his eyes in pain. There was no hope. The cut surface was only 2 or 3 centimeters away from the green window. Even if it wasn't cracked, it would have collapsed severely. Not to mention that the fine lines were still there, but they were not obvious. Boss Yu's voice was hoarse. "Does anyone want this piece of wool?" The few wool merchants who just made a bid looked at each other, and one of them hesitantly quoted the price, 60,000 star coins. As soon as he said that, he regretted it. It's really fascinated by ghosts. The remaining wool is very likely to be a skin green. It's a piece of junk if you buy it. Hearing this price, Boss Yu's body shook violently, and a wry smile appeared on his pale face. The wool of 1.5 million star coins rose to more than 4 million in just a few minutes, and then became 50,000 in a few minutes. It really fits the old saying. One knife is poor, one knife is rich, one knife is heaven, and the other is heaven. One of a knife. This feeling of falling from heaven to hell, he has learned today. Boss Yu's red eyes looked at the wool dealer who made the bid. "Okay, 60,000 star coins. This piece of wool is yours." He just wanted to get rid of the cut wool as soon as possible. The wool merchant laughed shyly. "Well, Boss Yu, I just got a headache and accidentally called the wrong thing." "Alas, you bastard." Honestly, that's not really a gamble. I originally wanted to call for 10,000 star coins, but my mouth was bald, and it was said to be 60,000. As a big boss like you won't care about me, will you? You. Boss, you was shaking with anger. Not to mention that this woolen material collapsed, and he was so ridiculed by others, his face turned purple for a while, and he was so angry that he was speechless. Instead, he coughed a few times violently, and his expression was very embarrassed. Several friends of Boss Yu hurriedly stepped forward to support him, staring at the wool merchant with a bad expression, and the atmosphere in the shop became a little dignified. When the two sides were facing each other, a clear and pleasant voice came from behind. Boss Yu, I will pay 60,000 star coins. Can you sell me the remaining wool? Everyone turned back spontaneously and made way for him. I saw a young man in a white sweater come forward, with a slender stature, fair complexion, and elegant temperament. But the black-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose covered most of his face, which looked rather strange. Many savvy people recognized the brand on his body. It was a high-grade material custom-made by hand. It was soft and skin-friendly, light as nothing, and the price was quite high. So they knew in their hearts that this must be the young master of some aristocratic family who was idle and bored to join in the fun. Bai Jing came late, so he stood against the wall at the periphery of the crowd, paying attention to the calcite situation on the big screen. Boss Yu casually took the piece of scrap that was cut out of white flowers with the first knife and put it on the table beside him, not far from his hand. Bai Jing got closer and carefully observed the piece of waste, and found that there were inconspicuous band-shaped pine flowers underneath. The color was very light, and there was a certain chance that jadeite would bloom. The most important thing is that when he saw this piece of wool, he had an intuition. This feeling was very strange. There was no reason, but he felt that there should be jade in it. So, Bai Jing probed his perception into this piece of wool that was about 2/3 the size of a football, and actually sensed an active reaction, and it was very active, only slightly weaker than ice seed. As long as you cut off about 3 centimeters along the white stone outside, the rest is all jade, estimated to be 6 or 7 kilograms. With this part of the waste, this half-bet wool will not fail. Bai Jing walked straight to Boss Yu along the path that everyone gave up and reminded without a trace. Actually, you have another piece of wool. Do you want to try again, in case you can get jade? Which piece of wool was he talking about? Wouldn't it be that scrap? Forget it. The cut surface of the waste is a stone with white flowers. How can there be jade? That's right. The cracked and green areas can't be opened, let alone that piece of junk. Everyone was talking about it. No one was optimistic about the piece of wool, and even Bai Jing was regarded by them as a prodigal son of a family. The wool merchant even smiled and said, "Hee hee, young master. Is this your first time to gamble? Listen to me, don't waste star coins. What's wrong with 60,000 star coins? You have to buy a piece of scrap." Jian Mao also leaned over and whispered, "Brother Jing, you are now a first-level stone gambler, and you need to count the rate of increase in gambling. This waste, or forget it." He knew that although Bai Jing looked a little cold on the outside, he was very soft and kind on the inside, thinking that he wanted to help this Boss Yu out of the siege. Alas, 60,000 star coins is not a small amount, not to mention wasting star coins. If you delay promotion, you will lose a lot. Bai Jingchong shook his head slightly, looked at Boss Yu, and waited for his response. When he heard the clear voice of the young man, the tone in Boss Yu's heart loosened a little, but at this time, he didn't want to see this piece of gambled wool again, and he didn't want to hear everything about gambling stones. Do you really want to buy it? Ahem, let's do it. Take away the 30,000 star coins, don't say more. Boss Yu directly reduced the price by half, and when the 30,000 star coins arrived, he and a few friends did not stop for a moment and immediately left in a hover car. Bai Jing spent 30,000 star coins to obtain 2 pieces of cut wool, a piece of wool with a window, and a piece of waste with a cut surface of a white stone. Seeing this result, the wool merchant who gave out 10,000 star coins was a little unhappy. If this young master didn't make trouble, he could get that piece of wool with the window for 10,000 star coins, which is still a good deal. Thinking of this, he said strangely, "Since the young master has bought everything, why don't you unpack it and take a look? Your bid is so high, you must have a unique vision. I wonder if we have the honor to follow you to open our eyes." "Yeah, untie it. Let's see if there is any jade in this scrap." Most of the people around hadn't dispersed, and it was not a big deal to watch the excitement, and the shop was in chaos for a while. Bai Jing looked at the wool dealer. His eyes behind the lens were as sharp as a knife. Yes, these wool materials were meant to be unraveled. He originally planned to leave this piece of waste for the end, and first unravel the few pieces of wool that would definitely be ruined. However, since this wool merchant is so aggressive, why doesn't he follow the trend? I hope that when the jade inside is solved, the other party will not regret it.